Hi, Karson.
Hey, Karan.
How you doing?
So awkward. Let's start over.
No, we're not starting over. This is going to be there. How's Denver?
Denver is great. Back in the office, like I mentioned, and everything is good. It's starting to feel somewhat normal here. There's like a lot of outdoor dining going on, and people are out and about, and things are great. How's LA?
There you go. LA's okay. You know, we've had some fires and things in California, so it's been challenging. But yeah, everyone seems to be eager to get back to normal. All right, we're going to talk about some interesting things. I actually particularly want to talk about what it's like to raise money, what it's like to build a business in this kind of crazy industry. I want you to tell me about Vangst. Maybe we'll start there, but like I'm actually a lot more interested in, you know, I think one of the things that people don't fully appreciate is like how important it is to like keep changing, keep moving, keep pivoting. And I think that's one of the things that's probably most impressive about you, or what I felt is most impressive about you in working with you for the last couple of years. But let's start with maybe the basics. Yeah, what is Vangst?
Yeah, well, Vangst is the cannabis industry's hiring platform. And so we connect the cannabis industry with the employees they're looking for, whether they're looking for full-time senior level employees, full-time entry level employees, or gig workers. Our platform and the services we provide helps the cannabis industry get connected with all types of employees to really ultimately help grow their business. Like at the end of the day, businesses are people, and the best businesses are those that recruit and retain the best talent. And that's what we're here to help the industry do. And talent's just such an important part of this brand new industry.
Well, when you first started this business, I know it had a different name. You want to tell people what that name was?
I mean, everyone laughs at it, but it worked. And the original name of the company was Graduana. I started the company when I was an undergrad at St. Lawrence. I actually have pictures in the library at St. Lawrence building the website on Wix, and it was Graduana, Green Jobs for Grads. And we were focused on helping interns and entry-level employees find their jobs.
So, I mean, what was cool and what I loved about the story was like completely bootstrapped, and actually unlike a lot of businesses that I'm used to seeing, like you were focused on how do I make this thing like profitable from day one. I guess at what point did it occur to you, or did you think I should raise money, and how did you like eventually get there?
Yeah, when I started, like, I didn't know what venture capital was. I honestly didn't even know what a staffing agency was. I didn't know anything about anything. So I had all these people that wanted jobs in cannabis. And the more that I understood the industry, the more I realized, wow, all these employers are having a hard time finding talent. And so started out doing the intern and entry level job piece for almost a year, and really learned the industry, and there learned, wow, this is a huge opportunity. Like, there is nobody focused on how do we help people from all different industries transition into the cannabis space? How do we build a community of people that are in the industry that ultimately want to move into other jobs? And so really started realizing what a big opportunity it was. And we rebranded to Vangst, which means catch in Dutch. And we started growing the team completely organically. And so for all of 2016, all of 2017, and then until the beginning of 2018, when we ended up raising, we would just use really like the money that we made, and we'd reinvest it into hiring another person or getting a trade show booth. But it was never like I had a ton of capital, right? I was always waking up in the middle of the night looking at the bank account thinking, like, can I make payroll in the next few weeks? Because I wanted to keep hiring people, but then I was chasing down receivables. I'd have one client who wouldn't pay, and it would be like the risk of making payroll. And so we wanted to grow, and we saw these opportunities and grow more efficiently than we were. We were all manual. We had very little technology, and we thought if we can build a technology platform, we can better connect employers to employees. And certainly we wouldn't be able to continue reinvesting in growth organically and build a technology platform. And so that's when the idea started coming into my mind.
And I guess, like, was that the way it went down, where you were like proactively thinking like I should raise money, or like along that way of those couple of years, were people approaching you to invest?
So actually, another one of your portfolio companies, LeafLink, Ryan Smith, we were really good friends, and he kept telling me, like, you're crazy for not raising money. You have a good business. Like, by the time you invested, we had done, in the previous year, in 2017, we had done over $1 million in revenue, and we hadn't raised a seed. And so Ryan was telling me, you should really consider raising capital. Let me introduce you to some investors. And I was weary about it, right? Like, I had heard some horror stories about venture capital, and I think maybe there's like a stigma to it. And I'd been going along on our own, now at this point we have a team, it's not just me, for so long that I wasn't sure if it was right for the business. And at the same time that Ryan and some other founder friends were telling me that it was the right thing to do for the stage we were in, we were getting inbounds and introductions to some investors and started having the conversations.
So what was that like? What was like that first round of funding like?
I remember vividly our first meeting, actually. I don't know if you do, but it was, so I was in LA, and I think Ryan Smith had gone and had lunch or something with you, and he mentioned that he was hanging out with me and that you and I should meet, and you said we should meet the next day. So we met up for coffee, and I didn't have a deck. I don't think I had a deck, but we went to coffee and we talked for probably 2 hours just about Casa Verde, about Vangst, about sort of where we were going. And you said I should stay over the weekend, and then the next week meet up with Yoni, and that you guys were really interested in investing. And so I stayed in LA over the weekend, and then we met the next week and met with Yoni, who was your judge, I think. And then I thought, okay, like, I'm really going to start a process here. I'm going to make a deck, and I'm going to go out and meet with a bunch of investors.
I mean, it all worked out, and you got some great investors aside from us as well in that round. I mean, I guess, like, when you finished it all, and we don't need to go through all the fun dynamics of getting to where you eventually landed, but like, what was like your biggest takeaway in learning? And now, as you're, an entrepreneur who's raised multiple rounds of financing and talked to many investors, both, cannabis specific and otherwise, like, what kind of advice do you share with, all these different cannabis entrepreneurs that you must be meeting, with Vangst, you serve hundreds and thousands of customers.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it comes down to meeting people that you can work with long term. I would say that, right, the difference between investors and employees is you can fire your employees if they don't work out, or your employees can quit if they don't like it. And same with customers. If it's not a good relationship with customers, you can choose to go your own way, or the customers can choose to go your own way. I think with investors, it's a little bit more challenging to kind of split up and go your own way. And so really trying to find people that you can work with long-term, who will be supportive of your vision and supportive of the changes that you may have to make along the way. So that would be one piece of advice that I would give. And don't settle, right? I think that what I've seen, particularly in the cannabis space, is that sometimes companies are really desperate for money, and so ultimately will take on a bad partner, and they would say, my gut said I shouldn't work with this group, but like, I'm so desperate that I did. I think that it's really not going to be worth it in the long run, because, like I said, it's a marriage. So that would be piece of advice number one. I would say piece of advice number two is like to have people around you that have gone through the process before, right? I mentioned that Ryan and some other founders had been through it before. The lawyer that I was working with obviously had supported many founders in going through raises. And so finding people that can make sure that everything that you're doing is standard and normal, and that you or your business isn't getting like screwed over in the process. I think if you're first time going through it, there's a pretty steep learning curve.
I mean, I guess, like, there's the added complexity of just being in our industry. How have you seen that change from your first round of financing to, your most recent?
Yeah, so I mean, what I would definitely say, another piece of advice I would give is bring people that can bring a lot of different perspectives to the table. And so we were super lucky in our seed round to have Lara Hippo lead the round. And then you guys were also in the round as well. So we had one group that was non-cannabis focused, right? Lara Hippo is the most active seed investor in New York City, and they invest in all different types of businesses. And so, and have a strong focus around technology. And so it was awesome to have them in our round because they've introduced Vangst and our team and myself to tons of other founders, tons of other businesses, and we can problem solve and learn from companies that are a couple rounds ahead of us. And so bringing that perspective to the table, and then having Casa Verde, who you were in our seed round and then you ultimately led our Series A, you know the cannabis space extremely well. I mean, I remember right after we closed the seed, you guys started making so many introductions. Like some of our biggest clients ever came from you guys as introductions, and you have a really strong understanding of what's going on the ground in these markets, help us think through what markets to launch. And so, right, I really thought we had as I was thinking through the seed round in my head, I thought we had a really powerhouse team. We had a very strong cannabis specific fund, and then of course like the strongest seed fund. So that was where why I thought it was going to work really well. I think it has.
Yeah, and then like, what's the difference between raising a seed and then raising a Series A?
So we raised our seed in March of 2018, and we raised our Series A in January of 2019. And so what I would say is that we really raised the seed to build and launch Vangst Gigs. And when we met, Vangst Gigs was an idea. We didn't have any technology. We weren't even really doing it manually. And so we built and launched the technology platform. We launched it in Colorado, and it did really, really well, really fast. And then we soft launched in California, which was the whole thing, getting the California workers' compensation and everything else that went along with it. And we just thought if we can pour gas onto this, we'll be able to expand Vangst Gigs into additional states, as well as build out the technology platform and connect our clients to not only gig employees, but full-time employees as well. And so then we, closed the Series A in Q1 of 2019. And then we, hard launched California, Nevada, Washington, Oregon, and Michigan. And then COVID happened.
What's that been like?
What has that been like? I mean, it's so funny interviewing with you because you've been along for the journey. But, what I will say is that cannabis was having its own, I would say, mini session, canna session, before COVID happened. And so when I think about really the first half of 2019 into the summer of 2019, and it was crazy, right? Cannabis companies were being valued at insane numbers, and they were flooded with cash, and they were spending it on hiring. And so our business was doing, really well because all of these companies were hiring, and they were coming to us to make the hires. The canna session started to happen. I think the cannabis companies were really just coming back down to earth, and they were their investors, and the market was demanding that they be somewhat self-sufficient and cash flow positive. And so therefore they started making really hard decisions, and they started laying off massive amounts of people. I mean, I think last summer, actually Business Insider started doing a weekly newsletter just around the cannabis layoffs. And so for our business, we went from every single one of our clients hiring to every single one of our clients laying people off. And so that was already happening to us before COVID happened. And so that somewhat slowed down our growth trajectory, particularly on the high level side, because when you're making these layoffs, you're cutting the CMO that you hired for $1 million a year that you've realized now that's insane for the size of the business that we have. So that happened. And then COVID happened. And so it all happened really fast. And I really do think it forced the industry and a lot of clients to reset. I think I know we did a survey and found that over 80% of our clients did layoffs or furloughs leading up to or during COVID. And so the majority of our clients went from growing to downsizing. And so that became challenging for us. So it really went from we're growing like crazy to how do we survive and get through this? So on the tail end of this, when our clients do start growing and higher again, we're positioned very strongly. Yeah.
And I mean, I think like in so many ways, Vangst is like a really, really a leading indicator of like what is about to happen in the industry. And I think, you and I talked about this a few months ago, right? Like as you started to see things pick back up, you also saw that kind of similar uptick in investment activity in the cannabis markets, public markets, right? I mean, you work with some of the biggest, even public names in cannabis. So it is actually interesting. You have a really unique insight into what's happening in the business. And part of that is because you've built now a pretty strong and impressive team. I don't think you've ever hired or managed these many people before in your career. What's that been like? 'Cause it's not like, using myself as an example, like before Casa Verde, I worked at a big investment bank. I managed like a pretty substantial team. I have some idea of doing it. How has it been for you, like, almost like learning on the fly and like building what's a really not only an incredible team, but one that is, very loyal and, truly like bleed orange and yellow, whatever the Vangst colors are.
Well, thanks for saying that. I like to think that the Vangst team bleeds orange, and I think most people do. Like you said, it's definitely learning on the fly, right? In my company in college, everybody was 1099, and it was a college company. We're selling college trips, and so it was much different than having full-time people. And so the most employees we've had at Vangst was 70 people, and we too during COVID downsized a bit. We're now hiring again. Actually, 5 people started yesterday on Monday, so I'm sure we'll get back up to that. But I don't even know where to start. There's been so many different learnings and just like the way that the team has changed, right? What works for a company of 10 people doesn't work for a company of 20 people. And what works for a company of 20 doesn't work for a company of 40. And I heard a really good saying that sometimes companies grow faster than people. And so you really can't expect a manager who did a great job managing a team of 3 to be able to manage a team of 10. But then how do you have that conversation that literally 6 months ago, you were amazing and killing it and the best ever for the business, but now actually we have to hire over you because we're taking it to the next level. So, there's just been so many learning curves over the last 4 years of running Vangst in terms of me hiring internally.
Yeah. And I got to say, like, you are really transparent about that. You really proactively seek a lot of feedback from your investors, and obviously, like, I can only speak to myself, but I'm sure that's the case sort of across your cap table. What are some of the things you did for yourself to become a better manager and better leader? I know you're like you consume a lot of that kind of content. Like, what has that been helpful? How do you try to approach it?
Yeah, I think, like, to your point, it's really hard. I think that I am transparent with our investors and I'm transparent with the team. And it's because I just like have a hard time faking it. Like, I don't know what the saying is. I wear my emotions on my sleeves or something like that. But like, if things are going great, you'll know it's going great. And I'll be overly enthusiastic about it. If it's not, I'll say that it's not, and I can't fake it and pretend like it's not. And so, I think that that's worked out well for me sometimes and not well for me other times. I don't know how I ended up talking about that, but what I was going to say about how have I gotten to be tried to become a better manager, a couple things. One, I work with an executive coach, which has been really helpful. And every 6 months we do a 360 review where all my direct reports and then just a couple random people throughout the company do like a pretty extensive, like basically review on me. And so they speak with my coach, and then at the next 6 months, we see after the review, we set like goals around what I want to improve on. And then 6 months later, we do it again and we talk to the team about how I've improved. So like an example of an area that I used to send like very reactionary emails. And so something would happen and I would be like, because I'm traveling all the time, we have a team in LA, a team in Denver, we have some people on the East Coast. And so something happens and, maybe it's something with a customer that you care so much about and something with someone messed up. You freak out because this is like your baby, right? And you just don't want it to be messed up. So I used to send these kind of reactionary emails, and people that knew me and worked with really close with me were like, this is totally normal. But, you get to 70 people and you have a brand new person that just started and you get like a freak out email from the CEO. It's completely unprofessional and unacceptable. So, and people were like, what the hell is going on? So, that's an example of like, that was feedback that came up. And so now, I'll type the mad email out and then set it aside for a few hours. And then usually by then the issue has resolved itself and I don't even need to get involved. And so, there's an example, or, just letting people do the job you hire them to do. I think that that's a really hard thing for founders to do, right? Your job is changing so fast. And so I used to be the only salesperson, the only customer service person, the only accounting person. It's funny, like my friends were joking that before I had an office, when it was still Graduate, I was working on, various people's couches. And, my phone would ring and I would answer and I would say like, let me transfer you to accounting. And I'd, like put the phone on mute and like run into my friend's room, my friend Liza Solberg. And I'd be like, can you pretend to be accounting and like talk to this person? Right. And like, those are just like the crazy. And then I would go on and send the invoice, right, from accounting at Vangst.com and, have a different name there in the signature. So you're used to doing all these things, right? And then suddenly you have an accountant and you have to not do the job for them, teach them how to best do the job, because otherwise you'll just always be this hamster on the wheel. And I'm still trying to improve on that. But, the job that I'm doing right now, surely 6 months from now, it'll be different. So it's like every time I feel like I'm kind of starting to get good at what I'm doing, the job changes.
So I would say like for someone who, yes, you had a company before, now you've been at this for a while, you seem to me to have like a lot of innate skills that like helps you tremendously. And you kind of have like a lot of these natural qualities from a entrepreneurial and leadership perspective. What would you attribute that to? I know, your father is an entrepreneur as well. I mean, like, are there things you think that have been like particularly gleaned from some of those experiences when you were younger?
I was saying this to someone the other day. I think like entrepreneurism is partially DNA. I think some people just have it or they don't. And you can't explain that kind of stuff. And then it's partially around, I think it can come out or not come out based on the people that you're around. And so I was really lucky in the sense that, like you mentioned, my dad's an entrepreneur. I grew up, he was very entrepreneurial. I was always at his office. I was obsessed with what he was doing. I wanted to go on work trips with him. Like we were just always really close, and loved that he just worked for himself and just saw how hard he worked to build the business. And I thought it was great. So I was really inspired by him. But then also like he and my mom and everyone else in my family was really supportive of my ideas. And so if I wanted to start a business growing up, like I had a golf ball stand and they were so supportive of it, right? And they were, out there with me getting the stand set up in the morning and helping take it down and figuring out how every day my sales were going up or down. And so like my parents were just always really supportive. And I think that that's important because a lot of times you'll come up with an idea and people all around you will be like, no, it's a stupid idea. Don't do it. Don't do it. I mean, think about Graduana. Like I remember being at our graduation.
I mean, the name was brilliant for sure.
I was at our graduation dinner, all our friends' parents and grandparents, and everyone's walking around talking about the jobs that they just accepted. And I was telling everyone Graduana, and, people are like looking around and my dad's like, like high-fiving me, like saying how awesome it's going to be. So it's just, a lot of parents would have been like, are you crazy? Like, don't do that, right? Move to New York City and like get a job. But they were really supportive.
So let's talk about like the transitions you've made in the business. And like, I've definitely seen a few key ones, gigs being a big one. Like, I guess my question to you is like pivoting, and it's not so much pivoting as it is like maybe adding new business lines, is really challenging, especially when like things are good and they're going fine. Like, how do you start sort of thinking about the future of Vangst and how do you start implementing those kind of changes? Because it's not just like adding a new business line. There's a lot of cultural changes. So, I'll just jump in around like the tech stack around gigs. Again, brand new like foray for you, right? Having never built like a tech platform before, and your core business is doing well and is spitting out cash. Like how do you get sort of comfortable with that, and what's the process of jumping into these new areas? And I know there's others coming up which you can talk about, but
Sure.
Talk us through that process.
First and foremost, like I think that when you want to where gigs, we'll start out with gigs and then we can get to the new Vangst.com, but where gigs came from was a lot of inbounds from customers. And so we started out, just for people don't know, Vangst was a service business, a recruiting business. And people would come to us and they would say, hey, I need a head of cultivation. And our team of recruiters would go out and manually recruit a bunch of people in cultivation. We had two developers before anybody invested, and we had built this job board called Vangsters.com. And the reason we did it was just because so many people were sending us their resume every day, and we were like, we need a place, we need to build some type of platform where people can go, and we had all these ideas. So we had built Vangsters, but it wasn't really good. Like, it was two developers built it. So we were certainly not a technology company. We wanted to be, but we weren't. We were a very service heavy company. So we're getting all these inbounds from companies saying, we need temporary employees. We need 10 trimmers. We need 5 bud tenders. We need the various people. We knew those candidates were sitting in Vangsters, but how could we get them to the clients without having to have a million recruiters involved? And so that's where the idea around, rather than doing this the old school way, why don't we build a technology platform where candidates can come on, they can make a profile, they can then be screened by someone on our team, and then connect through the platform to the gigs. So that was the idea, but we had no idea how hard it would actually be, right? I think everyone thinks, just build an app, right? It's how hard could it be? So we build an engineering team, we build a customer success team, but all the while we start doing this manually. And so there was a huge cultural shift in the company from going from being a completely services business to a technology business, because people that are coming out of large staffing agencies or even boutique staffing agencies are very different than people who are coming out of fast growing, moving startups like engineer, product people, product marketers. And so it felt for a period of time, this was like one of the hardest times during Vangst, where it's like we had two different cultures, the services culture and the technology culture, and it was really hard.
Yeah. And so, I mean, you did it, gigs is now a really meaningful part of your business. What's next?
So what we found through gigs was that our candidates liked the process of making a profile on Vangst.com and being able to go in and browse around a lot of different gigs. What we started finding is that a lot of candidates actually want full-time jobs in cannabis. Like, they're like, I'll do a gig for a month, but I really want to find a full-time job in cannabis. Gigs are like my entry point to get into this industry and get some experience and get hired. So after they would go and work the gig and then want to go along with their way, they would have to go try to talk to the customer directly, because at the time you could only find gigs via our platform. You could not find full-time jobs. And so we said to the clients, well, what if you could hire candidates through Vangst.com the same way that you're hiring them through temporary? And they liked the idea. And so we kind of did a little mini rebrand and relaunch. And now when you go to Vangst.com, you have your company profile. So let's just say that we're talking about Native Roots, Vangst.com/Native Roots. You can see all their full-time jobs and all their temporary jobs, and candidates can apply. They can learn about Native Roots. They can learn about their company, their culture, other types of people that work there, what the interview process is like. There's a lot of great materials just on the company. Candidates want information on the company. And then they can learn about the temporary gigs as well as the full-time jobs right there. So that's what we launched recently. And now we're getting all of our clients onboarded onto the new Vangst.com, getting their rich company profiles set up and getting them to start posting their full-time jobs as well.
How hard is it to get clients to try to do things differently?
It's hard. I mean, clients are so set in their ways. I mean, the other options out there aren't amazing, right? You can post your job on Craigslist, but once a client gets used to their routine of logging into Craigslist, they're pretty set in their ways. And so I think that everybody thinks like, oh, you just launched this thing, like you build it and everyone will come running. And like in anything we've ever done at Vangst, that has not really been the experience. They tell you they will come running, like Vangst gigs. Everybody needed it. And I mean, it's sometimes a year they do, but like the fact of actually getting them to go through the process and follow the procedures we want them is always harder than you think it's going to be.
Well, one of my favorite moments over COVID, not that there's lots of good moments during COVID, was you did a virtual chat that you allowed us to sort of jump into, like a video conference with all the Vangst employees, both present and past. And everyone went around and was sharing their most memorable moments, which ended up being hilarious stories for the most part. So, if you could share one of those or one of your own, and you're definitely my favorite source of of content for the crazy things that happen in cannabis. What would you share? I know I'm putting you on the spot, and I should have had you prepare one, but something that you can share without getting anyone in trouble.
That was for the 4-year birthday party. I mean, I have so many favorite moments. I feel like my whole life is Vangst. So I think
let's go with funny story. We don't have to go for like proud moments. Those are always great and whatnot, but there's so many good ones. Can you feel uncomfortable not?
No, I mean, the funniest one is the client's okay with me telling the story, and we've resolved the situation. But and we'll decide if we want to edit this out or not. But the funniest story is we had a client in Oregon. They're a cannabis bank, and it was not funny at the time. But they were a cannabis bank, and they wanted a banker to work at their bank. And so they came to us, and they wanted people that were like bank tellers at like Bank of America or wherever else. And so we had a brand new recruiter, Jonte, who just started, and this is one of the first roles that she was put on. So she went out and she found really good candidates. She interviewed the candidates. She talked to them. She got them all set up. The customer said they wanted to interview these 4 people. She said, great. She got them set up. They went to the interview. After the interview, she called each of the candidates. The candidate said it went great. The customer said it went great, and we want to hire candidate A. So we'll just call candidate A Bob. So she said, great. Actually, I haven't been able to get in touch with Bob. He did send me a text saying it went great, but he hasn't called me. So they said, awesome. We loved Bob. He's the candidate for us. So a couple hours later, the client said, we need to talk to your CEO. And Jonte was like, well, why? And they said, we have a big problem. And so Jonte said, okay. So they get on with me, and we get into a video call, and they screen share. The candidate goes into the interview, leaves the interview, goes into the bathroom, waits in the bathroom all day, leaves. They leave and they go home. He comes out with a ski mask on, running through, trying to rob the bank. And so he just wanted to get in this interview. He was a made up person, and he even got his friends to be made up references, and he tried to rob them, and he got arrested. And we felt like we were the job provider that sent a bank robber to our client. But anyway, he fooled everybody. We figured out some ways to now do some backdoor reference checks before we send candidates in. The client was like super understanding and actually laughed about it after we found someone good. But it's just like one of those things, like you cannot make this up. And I feel like I have hundreds of those. Yeah,
you do have hundreds of those. We can decide later if we want this. It is pretty incredible though. And I think that's one of the things that the industry is slowly but surely becoming more and more institutional and professional. But especially with you guys, when you're placing thousands of people, across so many companies everywhere, unfortunately, some crazy things like this are bound to happen.
Oh, of course. And that's just, I also think we have a really inside scoop around what's going on. I mean, we have we consider people that we place into the industry as banksters. And so, our clients, our candidates become clients. And so we place somebody, and they do a good job, and they grow and build with our client, and they ultimately hire people, but we're friendly with them, right? We try to stay in very close communication with our pool of banksters and build community around them. And so, when something insane happens at a client, the candidates are the first ones to call us. And so obviously all that stuff is confidential, but I always say some point in my life, I should write a book about some of these things, because you just cannot make them up.
Well, I guess using that as a segue to wrap up, you do actually have this pretty interesting crystal ball in many ways. Seeing what's happened in the last couple of months, what's your outlook on the space? What do you think, sort of 2021 looks like? Obviously, barring, sure, pandemics and things like that that are out of your control.
Yeah, I mean, I think last year at this time, I was nervous about the space, right? I mean, yeah. I have, a Vangst file, and I can point to emails that I sent our entire cap table saying this is rocky. Our clients are doing more firing and laying off than hiring. That people can't raise, right? And so this time last year, I was definitely nervous about what 2020 would look like. And it's pretty much shaken out to be that way. I am more optimistic right now about the industry and about 2021 and 2022 than I've ever been for like a couple of reasons. Number one, I think that the industry is stronger coming out of COVID than going in. I think that everybody was curious about what would happen to cannabis in a recession, right? And cannabis has proven to perform incredibly well, better than alcohol has. And so consumers have proven that they want to purchase cannabis. I mean, think about the day in Denver where the mayor said they were going to be closing down dispensaries. People stormed the streets. We're lining up for blocks and blocks and blocks, panic shopping, protesting to not have dispensaries shut down. I mean, cannabis went from illegitimate and illegal in many places to essential. And so just from a consumer demand standpoint, I think that the demand is there. Consumers want cannabis. People rely on it for medication, and like it's not going away. Like number two, I think states are relying on cannabis tax revenue for their state. And I think that states that haven't legalized and it's still part of the black market, those states are starting to wake up and look at their neighbor that's generating, in many cases, hundreds of millions of dollars in tax revenues and realizing and creating hundreds of thousands of jobs and realizing, this makes sense. So I think from big picture, cannabis is here to stay. And I think that was proven more so than ever during COVID. So that makes me really excited. And then number two is there's a lot of states on the ballot that are looking to legalize this November. And then thirdly, a lot of large multi-state operators are proving that they can get to profitability, really proving. I think a lot of investors were like, can these businesses actually make money? Is this a legitimate business where we'd want to invest? So maybe someone like you was asking that. And now that investors have realized that, I think capital will start coming back into the space, which will obviously ultimately lead to businesses growing and more jobs. So those are the three main reasons why I feel much better about what 2021 will look like than I did about what 2020 will look like. And there's going to be so many jobs. And I think that our business is positioned stronger than ever to fill them. And so very optimistic about 2021.
Yeah. And I couldn't agree more. And I think, we're almost fortunate, as crazy as it sounds, to have like a bit of a, like you said, like mini implosion or kind of recession or whatever in starting sort of May, June of last year. It really prepared businesses to start to think about how do we operate more efficiently? How do we operate with less capital? How do we reduce overheads? How do we get better management in place? All these things which seem obvious, but often when things are growing so quickly, you're not making the best decisions. And if capital is coming in really freely, then you're not even sort of minding all the P's and Q's in the ways you should, because you're just growing so fast. And I think, we've seen that across the industry through our portfolio. And it kind of set us up for COVID maybe better than most. So yeah, I share your sentiment, and I think we're really excited about the future too. Awesome, Karson. Well, thank you for spending this time with me.
No problem. Thanks for having me on.